All right, time to dive into some Azure interview prep. Today, we're going to help you crush those Azure interviews in 2025. We'll be focusing on a super helpful article called Top 35 Azure Interview Questions and Answers for 2025.
That's right.
And whether you're just starting with Azure or you're already an experienced cloud pro, we've got you covered.
Exactly. We'll be covering the fundamentals, but we'll also get into the deeper stuff that can really set you apart as an Azure pro.
Love it. So let's start with one of the first questions you might get asked in an interview. Why a career in cloud computing? It seems simple, right? But trust me, this is your chance to really shine.
Definitely. Interviewers aren't just looking for a textbook definition. They want to understand your passion, your motivations, and how you see Azure fitting into your career journey.
So think about it. What drew you to the cloud? Was it the scale, the power, the chance to build innovative solutions? Or maybe you're just fascinated by how this tech is changing the world.
Whatever your why is, be prepared to articulate it and connect it to your experiences. For example, if you're from a development background, you might talk about how Azure lets you build and deploy apps faster and more efficiently.
Right. Or maybe you're passionate about data analytics. You could highlight how Azure's tools are great for data storage processing and insights.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've nailed the why cloud question. Now comes the follow-up. Why Azure specifically?
Right.
There are other cloud platforms out there. What makes Azure stand out for you?
Good question. Well, the article points out that Azure is a natural fit for people who already know Microsoft products. So if you've worked with Windows Server or SQL Server, you've got a head start.
Yeah, it's like learning a new dialect instead of a whole new language.
Yep.
But what about for those who don't have that Microsoft background? Are there other reasons to choose Azure over, say, AWS?
Absolutely. Azure's known for having amazing developer tools. Plus, it has a seriously impressive range of services, from basic compute and storage to cutting-edge AI and machine learning.
Wow, so it's like a giant tech playground. You can build, experiment, and innovate with all sorts of stuff.
You got it.
Okay, let's get into some of the technical concepts you need to know for an Azure interview.
All right.
One of the most fundamental ones is the difference between SaaS PIs and AYA.
Yes, you got to be able to explain those clearly.
The SaaS, or software as a service, is software that's fully managed by a provider,
Right.
right? So you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. Think Office 365 or Salesforce. Just log in and use it.
Exactly.
Then you've got PaaS, or Platform as a Service, which gives developers a platform to build and deploy apps without managing the underlying hardware and software, like Azure SQL Database or Azure Storage would fall under PaaS.
Right.
And then there's IA, or Infrastructure as a Service. It gives you the most control. It's like having your own virtual data center in the cloud.
It is. With IEA, you're basically renting the building blocks of your IT infrastructure, like servers, storage, networking, but you're in charge of managing the operating systems and software. So you have a lot of flexibility, but more responsibility.
So if a company wants total control and has the expertise to manage it, IS might be the way to go.
Exactly.
And a great example of IS is Azure Virtual Machines. It's like having a virtual computer in the cloud.
Yeah, and you have complete control over the operating system applications and configuration.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Now, what about Azure instances? I know Azure offers tons of different types optimized for different workloads.
Oh yeah, tons. You've got general purpose instances for balanced workloads, compute optimized for when you need serious CPU power, memory optimized instances for data intensive apps. The list goes on and on.
It's like picking the right tool for the job. I remember seeing some crazy stats about those memory-optimized instances.
Oh yeah, those things are beasts. They can have up to 300 and 892 gigabytes of memory.
Whoa. Imagine the kind of data analysis you could do with that.
It's incredible.
So understanding these instance types and when to use them is super important for an Azure interview.
For sure, it shows you can apply the concepts to real-world scenarios.
All right, that covers some of the foundational Azure concepts. But for those going for more senior roles, you'll need to go deeper. Let's start with deployment environments, specifically staging and production.
Okay, so think of staging as your testing ground. You can experiment and make sure your application is working before releasing it.
So it's where you iron out all the kinks before the big debut,
Exactly.
and then once you're confident, you deploy it to production, the live environment where users interact with it,
Right.
like a dress rehearsal before opening night. Okay, so you've deployed your app. How do you ensure it's performing well and catch any issues before they become big problems?
That's where monitoring comes in. Azure has different types of monitoring to give you insights into your application's performance.
I remember the article mentioned repetitive and minimal monitoring. What's the difference?
Okay, so imagine you're a doctor monitoring a patient's vital signs. Minimal monitoring would be like checking their temperature and pulse every few hours. You get a general idea but might miss subtle changes. Repetitive monitoring is like having constant data, EKG, blood pressure, oxygen levels. You can spot even tiny fluctuations and react quickly.
So repetitive monitoring is key when you need that real-time view of your app's performance.
Exactly, especially for complex apps or critical workloads where even a small hiccup matters.
Makes sense. Now, a lot of people get confused about Windows Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. These sound similar, but serve different purposes, right?
Yes, Windows Active Directory manages identities and resources on your local network within your company's firewall. It's the traditional way of managing access to files, apps, and other resources.
So Windows Active Directory is like the security guard for your on-premises castle.
Exactly.
But as more apps move to the cloud, you need a different kind of security guard. One for the cloud world.
Right.
And that's where Azure Active Directory comes in. It's
Yes.
like the passport control for the cloud.
I like that analogy. Azure Active Directory handles authentication and authorization for cloud apps and services. It makes sure only the right users can access sensitive data.
This is all really helpful. But let's move beyond definitions and see how these concepts work in real-world scenarios.
Sounds good to me. Let's put our Azure knowledge to the test.
All right. So we've talked about some of those fundamental Azure concepts, but now let's see how they work in real-world scenarios.
Yeah, let's get practical.
Imagine you're working with a client and they need to distribute traffic efficiently across their global Azure regions. What solution in Azure would you use?
That's where Azure Traffic Manager comes in. It's like a smart traffic cop, directing traffic to different Azure regions based on performance, health, and other factors.
So if one region is having issues, Traffic Manager automatically routes traffic to a healthier region.
Exactly. It's all about providing a seamless experience for users wherever they are.
I can see how that would be a game changer for businesses with a global presence. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The article also talks about public, private, and hybrid cloud models within Azure.
Right. These are different ways that organizations can use cloud services.
Can you break down each model for us?
Sure. A public cloud is what most people think of when they hear the cloud. It means your applications and data are hosted entirely on the cloud provider's infrastructure, which in this case is Azure.
So you're relying on Azure for everything, servers, storage, networking, everything.
You got it. You get scalability, flexibility, and cost effectiveness, but you're trusting a third party with your data and operations.
Gotcha. What about private cloud?
A private cloud is all about control and security within your own data center. You might use Azure services on premises or go with a completely self-hosted setup.
So if a company has strict security rules or wants total control, a private cloud makes sense.
Exactly.
And then there's the hybrid cloud, which combines public and private.
Yes.
So some applications or data could be in the public Azure cloud for scalability and flexibility, while keeping sensitive information on premises.
Precisely. You get the best of both worlds.
Hybrid cloud sounds like a good option for companies that are just starting to use the cloud. Now remember those Azure storage types? The article highlights blob storage as a real workhorse for unstructured data like images and videos.
Yeah, block storage is great. One cool thing about it is that it can automatically optimize storage costs based on how often data is accessed.
So you don't pay top dollar for data that's just sitting there.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like a smart storage system that knows which data is hot and which is cold and adjusts the storage tier accordingly.
That's a pretty neat feature.
Uh-huh.
Okay, back to those interview scenarios. The article mentions a situation where you need secure communication between virtual machines.
Right. Security is super important in the cloud, and Azure Virtual Network is the go-to solution for creating a secure and isolated network environment for your VMs.
So it's like creating a private network within Azure where your VMs can talk to each other safely.
Exactly. Think of it as a secure, gated community for your VMs.
I love that analogy. It makes it so much easier to understand. What about situations where users need to access multiple applications without entering their passwords every time?
Right. That can be a pain. That's where single sign-on or SSO comes in. You can configure Azure Active Directory to enable SSO. It streamlines authentication and improves the user experience.
So it's like having one master key that unlocks everything.
Yeah, sign in once and you're good to go. It eliminates password fatigue and improves security by reducing the number of passwords people have to remember.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's one more concept I want to unpack. Azure Service Fabric.
Ah, yes. Service Fabric is a platform for building and managing microservices-based applications. It's a bit more advanced, but it's becoming increasingly important in cloud-native development.
Can you quickly explain what microservices are and why Service Fabric is relevant?
Okay, imagine building an application like you're building with Lego bricks. Each brick is a small independent service that does a specific thing.
So instead of one big application, you break it down into smaller manageable services that work together.
Exactly. That's the idea behind microservices. And Service Fabric provides the infrastructure and tools to manage, deploy, and scale those microservices.
So if I'm aiming for a senior Azure role, understanding Service Fabric is important.
For sure. It shows that you understand modern cloud architecture and can work with complex distributed systems.
And I'm feeling more confident about those Azure interviews.
Good. Remember, this is just a taste of what's in the top 35 Azure interview questions and answers for 2025 article. I highly recommend checking it out for a deeper dive.
Absolutely. You've given us a great foundation. We've learned about Azure services like Traffic Manager, Virtual Network, and Service Fabric, and we've tackled real-world scenarios. Now I'm excited for the final part of our deep dive. We'll wrap things up with some expert tips to help us ace those interviews. All right, welcome back for the final part of our Azure Interview Prep Deep Dive. We've covered so much ground from soft skills to those complex technical concepts and how to use them in real-world scenarios.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
And hopefully you're feeling a lot more prepared for those Azure interviews.
Definitely.
But before we wrap up, let's touch on a few more tips, things that can help you stand out from the crowd. The article talks about Azure Resource Manager, or HRM, as a key tool for managing resources in Azure.
Oh, yeah. ARM is essential. It's like your command center for Azure. It lets you deploy, manage, and monitor your resources efficiently, whether it's virtual machines, storage accounts, or entire application infrastructures.
So if you can show that you know how to use ARM effectively, that could impress interviewers.
Absolutely. It shows you have hands-on experience. You understand how to actually work with Azure.
It's one thing to know the concepts, but it's another to show you can use them. And we've talked a lot about the technical side of Azure, but communication and problem solving are important too.
For sure.
Remember that client who wanted their applications front end on Azure but their database on premises?
Yeah, I remember that one.
That's where those skills come in. Being able to explain the point-to-site solution clearly, highlighting its benefits and addressing any concerns. It shows not just your technical knowledge, but your communication skills too.
Right. You're connecting the technical details with the business needs.
Exactly, making sure everyone understands what's happening and why.
And when you face a tough scenario, don't be afraid to think outside the box.
The article talks about using Azure Virtual Network to isolate network traffic between VMs for security. It's a great example of solving a complex problem using Azure's tools.
It is. It's about understanding what Azure can do and using it strategically.
So as you prepare for those Azure interviews, remember, it's not just about memorizing facts. It's about showing you really understand the platform, your problem-solving skills, and how to communicate your ideas.
And don't forget to let your passion for the cloud shine through. Enthusiasm and a desire to learn are always appreciated.
Well, that brings us to the end of our Azure Interview Prep Deep Dive. We hope you found it valuable.
Definitely check out the top 35 Azure interview questions and answers for 2025 article for more info and practice questions.
It's a great resource.
Yeah.
And as you continue on your cloud journey, keep learning, experimenting, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Azure. Good luck with those interviews, and we'll see you next time.